Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Phil Ittner, the veteran American war correspondent who is stationed in Kiev, Ukraine. He is Phil Ittner on YouTube. He's got a video blog there if you want to check it out. And also on Twitter, it's Philip Ittner, I-T-T-N-E-R, Philip with one L, one P, or two Ps, I guess, beginning and end. And Phil, welcome back to the program. How is life? The last time we talked, things were pretty grim there. You all were under assault from the Russians.
We had just suffered a major attack over the kind of holiday period. Things are okay here. We, touch wood, in the capital have not been subject to an attack, a significant attack in quite a few days, and let's hope it stays that way. The weather has turned colder. We had a little brief period of amazingly mild weather, but it's turned cold once again. But the real story, I think, internally here within Ukraine, a number of important stories, but of course, the fighting out in the east has intensified, and we've seen some gains by the Russian forces, but it's in dispute exactly what has been achieved in a place called Soledar, which is roughly translated means salt city. There's an enormous salt mine out near a town near Bakhmut, where the Russians have been pushing for, months, really, to try and conquer this relatively inconsequential stretch of land. But they seem to think it's strategically important. And as a result of the fighting out in Soledar, there was an open dispute between a friend of Putin's who runs a kind of a mercenary group called the Wagner Group, notorious globally. They claimed that they had actually seized the city in its entirety, but the Russian military, who of course doesn't want to be upstaged by a bunch of mercenaries, said that they agreed, oddly enough, with the Ukrainian military in saying that no, the Wagner Group had not conquered Soledar entirely. And then I think also as a knock-on effect, and this is all wrapped up together, I suspect, Tom, there's been this major announcement out of the Kremlin that the head of the war here, the Russian military efforts here, that they would get rid of a guy by the name of, his nom de guerre was the Butcher of Aleppo, is General Soledar, Sorovikin, and he would be replaced by Gerasimov, apologies. And it shows that there's an internal power struggle, that there's a split, there's a divide, and that power is being shifted around the center, because Putin's image of being the indomitable leader of the country is now being questioned because this war is going so poorly.
It seems, and in fact, that was going to be my question, was Gerasimov's replacing Surovikin?
Surovikin.
Yeah.
Surovikin.
Wondering what does that mean? I mean, was he replaced like in charge of the whole Russian army or in charge of the Ukrainian operation?
It gets a little complicated, Tom, and I'll try and break it down as best I can. So Gerasimov led the initial invasion back in February 24th of last year. He is a much maligned character within Russia, especially in the kind of extremist elements within Russia who aren't against the war. What they're against is that they perceive Russia's military as wearing kid gloves in this conflict. The Ukrainians, of course, would not agree, and nor would I. But that's the impression from the extremist hawks in Russia, and they do not like Gerasimov. But the problem is Surovikin is a guy who he was brought in as kind of as I say, his nom de guerre is the Butcher of Aleppo. He was brought in to be a strong arm and to actually get some wins on the scorecard for Russia, and he just simply hasn't done it. And he has his enemies also in Russia. So it seems like there's this very serious power struggle going on. So Surovikin is sent to pasture. That's what we know. Gerasimov, who was the head, he was the chief of staff. He was in charge of the entire Russian military, Army, Navy, Air Force. In many ways, this is kind of being a demotion for him because he is being brought in to now take back control. But he was maligned because of the failed initial invasion.
So it's sort of like
all of this turmoil is going on. Yeah,
it's sort of like sending the Joint Chiefs, the head of the Joint.
That's right.
Yeah, Joint Chiefs or the Secretary of Defense.
If we send Milley,
Vietnam,
right? If we send Milley, right? Exactly right. It should, you don't send your, the guy who's in charge of all facets of your military to fixate on this one particular thing. In many ways, it is being seen as a kind of a demotion in many ways.
Right.
But there's also another question, Tom, and there's a lot of talking going on right now about this major shift in this kind of rotating, almost kind of like, what's the game we all used to play as kids where you go from one seat to the another?
Musical chairs,
it's this musical chairs thing going on. There's a lot of talk, scuttlebutt going on that Surovikin was a guy who also spoke to Putin in frank terms and told him the realities on the ground here. He was the one that convinced Putin publicly to pull back troops from Kherson and pull back from that major city in the south of Ukraine. He is seen as a guy who he's a bit of a brute. He's a aggressive guy, and he will speak directly to Putin. And it's thought in many ways that perhaps Vladimir Putin didn't like what Surovikin was telling him, so he brought in his old buddy Gerasimov. But again, all of this combined is just showing that there's turmoil in Russia. This doesn't happen publicly.
Yeah, this sounds an awful lot like
I couldn't imagine this 5 years ago.
Yeah, it sounds an awful lot like the situation in Germany in the last 4 or 5 months of World War II. We are now in Oklahoma, I think, training Ukrainian soldiers on how to use our Patriot anti-missile air defense systems. I'm assuming it's going to take a while for them to get on the ground in Ukraine. I mean, how is it going shooting down these? You've got the drones from Iran, and then you've got Russian bombers that are carrying cruise missiles that they're shooting from these bombers, into places like Kyiv, where you are. What's the situation with regard to all this?
Well, that Patriot missile system, that battery that's going to be delivered to Ukraine, and they're only really, I'm 95% correct, sure that it's just the one battery that's coming at this point. And that will obviously necessarily be put in the capital to create a defensive system against Russia's continued air attack. Now, you don't want to be shooting a Patriot missile at an Iranian drone. So there's a number of different arrows in Ukraine's quiver that they can use for different defensive measures when it comes to air defense. And their air defense is really quite good, but the fear is that the Russians might get to a desperate point where they start to use indiscriminate bombing or larger range or larger warheaded missiles. There's talk of a lot of basically Scuds, that kind of
like
size
they did in Aleppo.
missile that the Russians. Exactly right. And they're going to need a Patriot system to shoot down that kind of munition if Russia indeed does start firing it. And there's talk that Moscow and Tehran are close to a deal on that medium range, really large warhead missile system. So if the Patriot can get here, say in the next, month or two, which is, speaking to my military contacts, it's entirely possible that might happen. Then we can set up a defensive dome around the capital, and that's really what the Patriots are for. Yeah. But what's happening also right now concurrently is, aside from an air defensive system, there's a lot of talk about getting tanks in here as quickly as possible, because there's an expectation. Well, are Bradley fighting vehicles, but more than that, there's a talk of main battle tanks. Right now, there's a dispute over German Leopards perhaps coming here. The British have pledged some of their Challenger main battle tanks. These are the 70-ton behemoth tanks that roam the modern battlefield, and by no means are they obsolete. This would be a huge deal. Now, I myself have been in a Bradley fighting vehicle many times in my career. As a matter of fact, a Bradley fighting vehicle saved my life in Baghdad in '05. We went into Sadr City, and my vehicle was hit by 7 Chinese-made RPGs. And the reflective armor on the Bradley, which springs off just before an imminent strike by a RPG and diffuses that kinetic energy, that's great technology, and America has amongst the best in the world. As a matter of fact, the Russians have had to kind of, get their own version of it, and it's a standard now in the world. That kind of reflexive armor.
Phil, we have
so the Bradleys are no joke, but the battle tanks, that'll be the game changer.
There you go. We have literally just 1 minute before we hit this hard break here, Phil. How's life for you and the people in Kyiv right now? Is there enough food? Is there enough electricity and heat?
Again, touch wood. Yes, so far, recently we haven't had any electrical outages for any long period of time. Heating is touch and go. Some places are better with electricity than others, but here in the capital it has been pretty good. But it's taken a cold snap. There's food, there's things on the shelves, there's support coming in. It is not a dire situation in Kiev. It's by no means comfortable, but it's not dire. The problem is out in the east and in the smaller towns and villages around the country that don't have the support that the capital gets. And, they're going to need support for a long, long time, because the Russians still continue to try and make just sheer living a difficulty in hope of disheartening the Ukrainian people, something I suspect will not happen.
Yeah, remarkable. Phil Ittner, you can follow his video blog over on YouTube at Phil Ittner, Ittner, or Philip
Ittner.
Yeah,
Philip Ittner. Thanks,
Philippittner. And that's also his Twitter handle. Phil, thanks so much for dropping by today.